Okay, shall we?
Yep.
Let's get started. Okay. Hello, everyone. Hello. My name is Grant Kastner. Thank you all so much for coming and attending this session, part of our PD Extravaganza 2021. This is using Extempore for all three modes of communication, co-presented with our friends from the Delaware Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, also known as DECTFL. Let's get into it. Let's do some introductions. So I mentioned I am Grant. I'm Extempore's community manager, and I am a high school Chinese teacher in Minnesota. Vinny.
Hi, everybody. I am Vinny Civarelli. I am a Spanish teacher, secondary, at the Charter School of Wilmington in Wilmington, Delaware. And I am on the Twitter now because I'm hip and cool. So at Don Vicente07. It's been a great space to collaborate with people. So hopefully you can join me there.
And hey, everyone, I'm Catherine Rump, or better known as Callie, and I'm a Spanish teacher at Appoquinimink High School in Middletown, Delaware. And I have the pleasure of collaborating with Grant and Vinny today.
Thank you, guys. So without further ado, let's see, what are we going to be talking about today? So a little bit of a session breakdown. What are the three modes? We have interpersonal, and interpretive, and presentational. Now I put not as obvious for interpretive because it's not always as clear what we need to do when it comes to the interpretive mode. Then we're going to look at using the four skills: reading, writing, listening, and speaking, and integrating them with those three modes of communication. Adding into that, we're going to do some academic background. I have some sources that I've looked into, or we have some sources we've looked into, and we're going to, look at some quotes and some research that's been done that shows why we need to practice all three of these, as well as supplementing areas that we lack. And then finally, practicing and assessing all three modes of communication on Extempore, as is the name of this presentation, and their application on Extempore. Seeing various sample tasks, practices, assessments that you can do, and things that you can take directly from this session and put into your Extempore accounts. So I will pass it to Callie.
Thanks. We're going to talk today, as Grant mentioned, about the three modes of communication: our interpersonal, between two or more people having a discussion, a written or a signed conversation; interpretive, what someone can understand, interpret, or analyze; and presentational, of course, is presenting information. And we always want to keep in mind our goal of communication. And then you can see on the graphic here, around the outside of it are the other four C's from, of course, our ACTFL 5 C's. And those outside four are going to provide the content and context for communication. So as you're creating your assessments, you want to be able to ask yourself, will the assessment allow students to demonstrate their knowledge of products, practices, and perspectives of target culture? Of course, that's cultures. Will they be able to demonstrate knowledge and understanding of other disciplines, making connections? Compare language and culture, of course, is comparisons. Or will they be able to demonstrate that they can use their knowledge and skills of the target culture outside of the classroom, making the communities?
Awesome. Thank you, Callie. So Vinny has a little bit of a check-in for us before we get started.
All right, guys. So, great to see everybody on a warm summer day. So we want to do a little bit of a check-in. So on the scale of Michael Scott, if you're like me, this has constantly been on all summer long. I'm associating the summer of 2021 with reruns of The Office. So in the chat box, let us know, how are you feeling on a scale of Michael Scott, and why? Just to kind of do a little check-in. I know for me, I'm somewhere between a 4 and a 13. I'm excited. I'm nervous, but I'm always happy to talk about our craft, and I'm doing it with two great colleagues today. Callie, how are you doing today?
I'm gonna say that I'm probably, I don't know, maybe right around an 11. Kind of ready to party here and chat with everyone.
And then Grant said he's carving up with 10
I gave
there.
it a hard 10. I could use some pasta right now.
Yeah, we could use some pasta after the gauntlet of presentations. Is anybody else out there in our Zoomverse want to chime in on how they're doing in the chat box? How are you on the scale of Michael Scott? I'm sure you guys are all 11s.
I'll be shy.
Yeah. Okay. So some shy attendees today, or they're multitasking, which is great because we can do more than one thing at once. So we're ready to go. Let's get into this.
All right, thanks, Vinny. So we are okay. So we want to start by talking about the three modes across various language programs. So when I mean programs, I mean if you're teaching Spanish or French or Chinese, like I do, looking at the modes from level 1 all the way to level 4, level 5, or even AP, if you get there, and why it's important to integrate all three: interpretive, presentational, and interpersonal, into your program. So many language programs today give learners a lot of output-based practice, but deprive them of the opportunity to engage in meaningful input-based practice. And I think sometimes it can be easy to fall into that trap when we want our students to produce the language. We want them to speak. We want them to write, right? That's what they want to do after all. They want to speak. But before we do that, they have to be exposed to language. They have to get input first. So a balanced language program increases the chance of our L2 learners developing language competence that enables them to use the target language not only more fluently and accurately, but also with a higher level of grammatical complexity. Now, this was also written 8 years ago, and I think we have made strides since then. But like I said, we're starting with input because that is where you start, as we will see with a few other sources that I have today. So we're going to start with interpretive, practicing, and assessment. So for me, that's listening and reading. I want to do a little poll. Now, you guys were a little shy last time, but please feel free to share how you feel about this. How would you describe, in the chat, let us know, how would you describe your level of comfort doing interpretive assessments? What do you normally do to assess the interpretive mode? Let us know. Let us know. Me personally, I like using authentic resources. I like modeling. I like doing some role modeling situations or interpretive tasks. What about you, Vinny or Callie?
I was actually just typing. I'm about an 8-ish. I'm using a lot more of authentic resources, but I want to figure out more like entry points into those authentic resources with my students, and more than just the traditional true, false, multiple choice, fill in the blank. Using organizers, asking students to detect the main idea, or even alluding to like what would happen next. So I'm really trying to think about how to make interpretive a more, I guess, encompassing kind of activity. Callie, what about you?
I agree with what Megan just said in our text. Using infographics is one of my favorite things to do lately because there's usually minimal text, lots of pictures. So sometimes what I like having them do is kind of do a little annotation where they'll move a star to something that was important or interesting, move a little like smiley face icon to something that was funny, if that's pertainable to the text, move a question mark to something that they have a question about.
Yeah, these are all great examples. Christina Donahue, I like what you said, categorizing, seeing what doesn't belong. I think even something like that, it might seem super basic, right, and low level, but that's the type of stuff that we want to do. That's great. Linda says, I use articles from GeoIdo, I'm not familiar with that, and other sources, and do Q&A, ask students to categorize. Awesome. Listening exercises with images. Yeah, we're gonna see some of those today. So speaking of listening, what is this listening all about? Now, a little bit of background first. Now you see this giant quote right in front of us. I took this quote from this source because I really liked it. You might see, oh, why would you put so much text on a PowerPoint slide? Well, because I think it's powerful, right? And if we look at it and we break it down, I think the meaning can really have relevance to us. So let's see what this says. Some background on listening. Even though the other skills such as reading, speaking, and writing, sorry, Vinny and Callie, are essential to develop language proficiency, listening contributes primarily for language expertise. Listening awakens awareness of the language as it is a receptive skill that first develops in a human being. We don't come out of the womb reading, writing, and speaking. We listen first. Learning to listen to the target language improves language ability. The sound, rhythm, intonation, and stress of the language can only be perfectly adapted through listening. Nothing else, listening. To understand the nuances in a particular language, one must be able to listen, particularly with regional dialects, regional vocabulary. This all comes through listening. As we get to understand spoken language by listening, it is easier to improve the other skills and gain confidence. Listening helps the language learner to understand the beauty of the language. Now you might say, well, that's a little more advanced, but it's still there. It's still important, especially in terms of communicative language teaching, which I think a lot of us strive for. It is said that the basis for communicative competence is listening, as it provides the oral input and enables learners to interact in spoken communication, and hence Language learning largely depends on listening. It is where we must begin. Thus, listening forms a concrete basis for the complete language proficiency. Thank you for bearing with me for that long quote. But yeah, you can see just the importance that listening has and why, so much of CI is teacher, TPRS and CI. It's a lot of speaking and it's a lot of getting our students to understand what we're saying. And that is developing and honing their listening skills. A little more on listening, but at the same time, I think a lot of us know, as many of us have had to learn a foreign language at some point or a second language, listening can be very hard. Right? Listening, unlike the other language skills, is felt comparatively much difficult by learners as it has all its interrelated subskills, such as receiving. We have to understand it. We have to remember what somebody says. We have to evaluate what they say. And then we have to respond all in about 10 seconds. And when we're doing that in a second language, that can be pretty difficult. Also, listening activities generally induce the anxiety and stress among the learners as it involves the interpersonal and interpretive modes of communication, in which students have to actively participate. It can be challenging. It can be difficult. But as we saw earlier, this is where our L2 development comes from. It stems from listening. We have to be able to get over these humps. Transitioning then to the other side of interpretation, not just listening, but then reading. For students to develop the interpretive mode, therefore, they must encounter a text. You guys mentioned infographics, like a restaurant menu, even that. Those are all texts. And then be given the opportunities to discuss, analyze, and explain it. What are they doing with it? Reading comprehension occurs not only during the reading process and the interaction between the reader and the text, but also after the reading process ends. So in the few examples that I have for you guys, you're going to see, okay, what is the reader doing with the text as opposed to just reading it and then answering some multiple choice questions, like we mentioned earlier. Okay, so we have some background. We have listening, we have reading. Let's see some examples of what this looks like on Extempore. So I'm going to drag this over. I have my class. So here I am now on the Extempore student portal. I have one example of listening practice. I have a listening assessment. I have a reading practice, and I have a reading assessment. Let's look at listening practice first. So I call this a comprehensive dictation. Now you guys might be familiar with what a dictation is. You listen and you type out what you hear. Me though, I like to add in extra elements and say, okay, listen to the sentence, then type out what you hear, then rearrange the sentences to form a logical paragraph. So there's an extra element added. So this is something you can do on Extempore. Let's see what it looks like for the student. So this is Chinese.
我听说今天要下雨。今天的天气怎么样？
So I'll stop there. But what happens is the student writes the first sentence they hear, and then I will do the second one. And so what this is, so this says, I heard it's going to rain today. But then the other person asks, what's the weather like today? Right? So the student automatically knows, if they know the language, that this would have to come before. Right? So the idea is that I have two more sentences in this audio file that they would listen to and type down. And once they hear the whole thing, they look at what they've produced, they read it, and then they put it back in order. That is interpretive practice. So that's one thing I really like to do. And then when it comes to an assessment for listening, adding another level, this is a mediation exercise. So you're at a restaurant with a friend who doesn't speak Chinese and your mediation is required. You ask the laoban, the host, the guy who owns the restaurant, what the most popular dishes are, and he responds in Mandarin. Tell your friend in English about at least two dishes that he mentions. So here I add a timer. I'm just checking my time. Okay, I add a timer, right? And it's stay at 15 minutes to review, 15 seconds, excuse me, and 30 seconds to respond. So what does that mean? So as soon as I play this and it finishes, that time to review will finish. We'll start, excuse me.
应该说韭菜水饺是最受欢迎的，对，大家越来越喜欢吃那个。然后鸭鲜馄饨，我个人觉得很好吃，可是好像人家不想吃了。对，最后呢，我们也有锅贴，用辣椒酱蘸一蘸，真的很棒，你应该尝一尝。
So the student hears that, they hear the target language being spoken, they have to interpret it and say, okay, oh my gosh, what did he just say? Now I have to tell my friend what he said in English. That is an interpretive exercise. That is an interpretive assessment. Because then they can't just repeat what they heard in the target language. Timer starts, I'm not gonna do the whole thing, but I might say, oh, he said the dumplings were really good. Stop recording and I submit my attempt. There's a really good practice. Okay, so I don't want to take up too much time, but I do want to highlight a reading practice and then a reading assessment. I love using oral reading. Oral reading, I think, is a great way to practice. If I have a text here, I can just get my students to read it out loud. This is talking about the weekend. So they should sound excited when they read it. That shows that they comprehend the text. And then finally, I have a reading assessment, which is similar to what I just said with the listening assessment, where I say, okay, you're at a restaurant and a friend wants to know what they can order. Tell them at least 3 items in English. Don't feel bad about making your students produce it in English, because that means if they're doing it properly, they know what they're reading. They know what they're seeing. And they can interpret it, right? So you see the timer, I see the menu. All I have to do is type out what somebody could get at this restaurant in English again. So like I said, these are examples of interpretive practices, interpretive activities that you can do directly on Extempore. And with that, I will now pass it over to Vinny, who will handle the interpersonal section. Vinny?
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Grant. So yeah, I really just, I've appreciated, as I've tried to become a more proficiency-oriented teacher, to just really think about what are we asking our students to do at their proficiency level? Is it appropriate for their proficiency level? And I think, you know, we don't have to throw out dictation and some of those like classic practice type things we do with our students just because maybe they don't on first glance fit into the proficiency model. There's a way to use them not only to kind of build the skills throughout the proficiency levels, but also to, like, you know, lower our students' affective filter to make this thing, speaking a language, more doable. So I've done some dictations after, you know, watching a wonderful webinar from Grant this year, and my students enjoy it because it gives them an opportunity to really focus on sounding like a real person talking, you know, instead of just reading off of a piece of paper, which I think is something my students could really benefit from. So I'm going to talk about the interpersonal mode. And first off, I just want to kind of get a little feedback from our participants here today. How do you feel? Like, how would you describe your level of doing interpersonal assessments? What a crazy year it's been, you know, and so this I feel like was a category that was tough to accomplish in our classes, whether it was remote, hybrid, fully in person with masks. But I was really like just impressed with our content area, our community of world language teachers, of how they continue to try to get this mode done for our students' sake. So let's see, what are some things you normally do? Let's see here. Yes, I agree, Meg. You know, truly, it is difficult to do this assessment. It really is. You know, it seems like something, and maybe that's something we need to think about, is making more opportunities for interpersonal conversation in everyday class to make it not so intimidating, not only for the students, but for us as well. But it's a good point. I feel the same way sometimes. Sonia meets with them individually and has a conversation. Takes forever, right? And then what do you do with the students that are in the room? We've had the benefit of not thinking about that for a year and a half, but it's something that we have to consider moving forward for sure. Okay, great. So we got some great ideas. Linda says she did some Q&A, pen pal letter exchanges, pairing upper level students with lower level students. What a great opportunity, right? For some collaboration and guidance and tutoring and mentoring, and kind of showing them the way that you want them to be when they get to higher levels of proficiency. Awesome. Thanks for sharing, everybody. So one word that I really have been inspired by when I think about interpersonal communication is the word spontaneous. Our students, for better or for worse, they have access now to an incredible amount of resources online, on their phones, and even in class, right? And so I think students really, we have to break the habit of our students of thinking about what they would want to say in English or their first language, and then how would they say that or translate that into their second or third language. So really thinking and asking students to, number one, understand proficiency levels. I wrote in my notes as we're getting started for today, it's cliche, but we want proficiency, not perfection. So setting that tone that it's okay to trip your way or stumble your way through communication, as long as you're getting the task done, as long as you're getting your point across, as long as you understand the gist. Language learning, for better or for worse, it's a sloppy process. We're always learning, growing, and making mistakes. I think all of us in this panel, we would say that for as many years as we've been speaking these world languages that we teach, I still make mistakes and I still need to refine what I do with my language. So spontaneous. I wanted to get my students thinking about what could you do on the spot with the language when you're not translating away, or you're not looking through your notes, or you're not writing something out and reading it like a script. So I really felt spontaneity was necessary because I want to get them ready for real life application. You know, we don't maybe simulate that enough in our classes, and we need to do more of that. I wanted to counteract their reliance on electronic tools. Also, you know, the realization that we do benchmarking, whether it's in Apple or Stamp, or if it's AP testing. A few years ago, I was fortunate enough to teach AP, and I really had to start thinking to myself, why was it that we asked our students to start thinking about the AP tasks only at the AP level? So I really challenged myself as a predominantly level 1 and 2 teacher to think about how can I vertically align things like simulated conversations, which I'm going to focus on today, cultural comparisons, writing small pieces, emails. Why are those things that traditionally we weren't teaching until the upper levels? We can do them at every level, but how do we teach our students to do that according to their proficiency level? Another element that really makes spontaneity a very big focus of mine is I really want to ensure, are they gauging as well their level of proficiency appropriate to what they're able to produce? And then last but not least, to maintain assessment integrity, whether it's formative or summative, I really wanted to see that this was their work that they could produce on the spot and use it in a real life context. Now in class, as I mentioned earlier, I really try to make an effort to kind of do interpersonal tasks with my students, get them interacting with different people every class. Not only does it give me a little bit of breather from being sage on the stage, but it allows me to kind of float around and see, what do my students need? Do they need to learn more about exclamations or rejoinders? Do they need some conversation fillers? Is there some kind of a discrete grammar concept that I could teach them, not explicitly, but maybe with some phrasing or some chunking or some sentence starters? So these are some things that I do to do formative practice with my students, and these don't have to be one and done activities. One of my favorites is a signature search. And you notice I have a blank copy here. That's where I kind of generally speaking come up with a generic question or something relevant to the unit that we're teaching. And I model for my students how to answer it yes or no. And then it also can become kind of a fun exercise where the students are generating the words that will go into those boxes. And then I unleash them and they go and they talk to each other. They find out who's a yes and who's a no. And then we come back and we unpack that information. Another great formative practice using authentic resources, so it becomes interpretive and interpersonal, is I will find things such as weather forecasts, menus, Twitter posts, schedules, train schedules, plane schedules, maybe festival schedules. And what you do is you create a version A and a B, so you erase maybe 5 to 10 things. One student, student A, one student is student B, and you model it for them, you give them some sentence starters, you give them some framing, and boom, they go ahead and they talk to each other. And I think what's really valuable about this infogap type mentality is it shows the students that I need to talk to somebody to get information from them. And that's one of the main purposes of interpersonal communication in my eyes. One of my favorites, speed dating or quick interviews. Once again, a very organic process that can be modified to be open-ended or closed-ended questions, depending on what you want to do in your unit, what you're talking about in your unit, what your topic is all about. And once again, it's a great activity that I can break up. I can say, talk to 2 students today, talk to 2 more tomorrow. And then I can, I have some entry points as the teacher, the guide from the side, to step in and give them some feedback on how they can do better or what they can do differently. Last but not least, class surveys. We do some kind of a polling on some kind of a question, once again, relevant to the topic or theme that we're exploring. And then I always like to ask our students to come back now and visualize that with some kind of a graphic, whether it's a pie chart, just a bar graph, maybe even an infographic of some sort, but asking my students not only to process information, but prepare it to be shared with others. And these are great things that you can do in every unit. Maybe you're not going to do all of these in every single unit, in every single lesson. That's fine. But it gives you a nice menu that you can pick from, that I try to pick from when I'm creating my units. So I want to talk about the summative process. So what do I do to evaluate students with their interpersonal speaking, with summative speaking? And once again, I call these simultaneous interpersonal communication activities. And it's very much modeled or very similar to the AP or Apple process, where the students will listen to some kind of a recording, and it will go back and forth with 5 to 8 exchanges. It really depends on what level and how comfortable you feel your students are. Now, one of the things that I love about Extempore is it finally gives me a platform where I can do this simulated conversation in kind of a safe, reliable space, whereas normal learning management systems don't necessarily give you that opportunity. So Extempore has been a real eye-opener for me, but it was intimidating to start creating these from scratch, I will admit. So what I've developed is a generic kind of form that you can use, and I use to kind of explain to students the different exchanges and give them a general idea of what's going to happen. I can give them some kind of a heads up. They won't know exactly what's being said to them, but I can give them a general idea of what they need to prepare for. And then I write some kind of a script. But when I'm writing that script and I'm thinking about the scenario, I really lean on this acronym that I learned from Leslie Grahn. Leslie Grahn is a wonderful world language just mentor and educator, teacher, guide that we've had the pleasure of working with in Delaware for the last 3 or 4 years. And one of her acronyms of many that I've learned from her is the SCRAP model, where I'm trying to simulate in this conversation some kind of a situation. I think the most important part of this is the challenge, or the what's the thing I'm going to use to keep the students on their toes? What's the role of the two speakers? Who's the audience? And then ultimately, what's the product or performance? So I use this template and then this scrap and acronym to start building a script that I'm going to use as person A to the student person B who's going to talk during this interpersonal conversation, simultaneous. Here's an example one before I go to Extempore and show you what it kind of looks like. So the students will receive only the top part. And with my learners, they're level 1 and 2. So I'm okay with right now giving them the exchanges, or at least a heads up of what the exchanges are in English. But over time, I will start slowly but surely start switching that into Spanish for my level 3s, 4s, and higher. And I might even do that with my level 2s if they're able to handle it. So that one that you see on the left side, that's the teacher version. But the students would only receive what you see on the right. And you'll notice that not only do I tell them, kind of give them an idea of what the flow of the conversation is going to be, but I also tell them what they should do, when they should ask questions, ask for more information, respond, disagree politely. And those are great opportunities to give your students those back pocket phrases that they can use in a conversation to react to what people are saying. Or more importantly, I've really focused on this year teaching my students conversation fillers, so they have something they can say while they're thinking of the next thing they're going to say back to respond. All right, so now I want to take you guys to Extempore and just kind of show you one of these and how it works. So here we are in our PD Extravaganza folder, and I've already have it open, but I'm going to view this as a student. And I want to show you, and I want to kind of express a little bit of vulnerability on this, because this was a bumpy process. I got better with the more of these that I did, which I'll share them with all of you guys in Sched and in our slideshow. But I'm still learning better ways in which to do this. And in Callie, my colleague, co-presenter here, she's given me another way to think about this going into the next school year. But let me show you what I have. So this is the scenario of the new teacher. And you'll notice how I give them the same scenario that they would find on that sheet that I showed previously. One thing I'm looking forward to is about being back in person is that the students will be able to have a paper copy in front of them that they can make notes on. But this year they had to do it, split screen on their computers. So 5 exchanges, and basically it's going to go like this. I do give the students a time limit just so they know they don't have an infinite amount of time, but they do need to talk. So they'll play the piece that I've prepped for exchange number 1. ¿Qué tal, profesor? Me llamo Vicente. ¿Cómo está usted? And the idea is to let the students talk as long as they need to get their point across. With different levels, I have different goals for that. In levels 3, 4, and higher, I expect them to fill the entire time that I give them. In levels 1 and 2, I just want them to get the task accomplished.
Hey, Vinny, just make sure you share your sound for the audio.
Sharing my sound, yes. That would be wonderful. Okay, audio settings. Not sure how to do that. Okay, here we go. Share sound. Okay, yeah. Okay, number 2. Sorry for those of you now paying attention. Thank you, Grant. Just making sure we're paying attention out there in the Zoom verse.
Sí, está aquí. Es usted Ricky Martin, ¿no?
No, no, lo siento, profesor. Mi nombre es Vicente Severelli. So, essentially, I'm going to have the students keep, I start off with some easy questions, then I throw some curveballs into them. For instance, the next slide, which I'm not going to go through all 5 of these, is that the teacher can't read because he forgot his glasses. He can't see their name on it. So he asks the student to spell it. And really the idea is to have some kind of a challenge that the student needs to listen for. It's really been great doing it as 5 different exchanges, but one of the advances or one of the changes that I'm going to make in future this year coming up is I'm going to do it as one question with all 5 exchanges built into the same audio piece, with me giving the students about 10 to 15 seconds in between each of my exchanges. And so that way it's one long recording instead of 5 individual exchanges. Not only will that help for students that maybe have spotty Wi-Fi and get kicked off, and I have to reset it and they've already heard the prompt, which kind of defeats the purpose of spontaneous communication, but also it makes it a lot easier on me, the grader, the evaluator, to kind of hear the entire exchange and give them some feedback on that. But it's been really a great process. And then, one consideration that I've really had while doing this in Extempore, and this is something for you to think about with your former students or upper level students or other teachers in your department, is the students need to hear people other than me speaking. And so you might want to rope in other people. Like, for instance, I roped my poor fiance, who's not a Spanish teacher, into being one of the voice artists for one of my simultaneous interpersonal communications. But it's important for students to hear different people's accents. It cannot always be my enunciated, well-spoken, thoughtful, comprehensible input, thoughtful, language, because the students aren't always going to hear that kind of language. Last but not least, I do want to mention one saving grace this year, because early in the year when I would do this, when the students would have their part of it, I would hear them typing. And I'm like, what? Why are you typing, right? Well, they're obviously translating something. They're looking something up. And if the temptation is there, they're going to do it. So safe mode, which easily can be found in preferences, permits the student from switching to another slide. And they get a warning. And if they navigate away, then they're locked out of the entire prompt, which in the first few times you prepare your students for that, you explain that to them. And you may give them like 1 or 2 mulligans throughout the marking period or the year. But ultimately, the students need to understand that you're not reading off of a piece of paper. You're not translating. What can you do simultaneously in the interpersonal mode at different checkpoints in our class? Coming soon, I want to do interpersonal simultaneous writing. So simulating texting, social media postings, really getting students to think about going back and forth in a conversation, but typing wise. So that's going to be one of my new challenges for the coming school year. But I'm really excited with the model that I have for interpersonal speaking, and I hope you guys find it useful as well. And that's my time. So I'm going to give it over to Callie now.
Okay, thank you, Vinny. So the last section that we need to talk about, of course, is presentational, which I'll be sharing with everyone some thoughts and ideas today. So just like Grant and Vinny did, we'll start presentational with our poll. How would you describe your level of comfort with presentational assessments, and what do you normally do to assess presentational? So I'd love to see your ideas and thoughts in the chat. Oops. Okay, so Vinny's saying he likes to do IPA style speaking and writing, having students do daily interactive presentations from Grant. How about any of our attendees? What are some of the ways that you like to use presentational? Megan says that it's usually the easiest to assess, doing emails, having students create infographics. Sorry, I'm accidentally clicking ahead here. Great. I also like having students do emails, making Flipgrid or Extempore type presentations where they might be filming themselves, doing sort of a how-to and teaching someone else a skill, or maybe even kind of creating a review video for class. So when we're talking about presentational, one of the things to note in a book that we read by Martin Bygate, Speaking, is that we want to think about routines. Routines meaning conventional ways of presenting information. And since it's conventional, we're talking about they're predictable and they'll be ensuring clarity for everyone. So you're expecting a certain tone and intonation, certain kind of eye contact or gestures. For information routines, they're frequently recurring types of information structures, things such as stories, descriptions, presentation of facts, comparisons, or giving instructions. Bygate further separates the speaking skills into two categories, the skills and the knowledge that you need to have. So for your skills, you have the motor perceptive skills, physically producing the language, because different languages require different motions that your mouth, your lips, and your tongue might need to create. Your interaction skills are knowing what to say and how to say it. And then your knowledge, those are your grammar, vocabulary, cultural and etiquette norms, reading the situation and understanding their interlocutors, meaning the audience's internal position. So these are critical pieces of information that we want to consider when we're teaching and assessing. Some examples of types of presentational writing or speaking are giving a speech or other oral presentation, composing and reciting poetry, telling a joke or story, creating how-to videos, writing reviews for entertainment, essays, or writing advertisements or brochures. So what are some other examples that you can think of for presentational speaking or writing? Go ahead and send those ideas in the chat. What are some other presentational ideas that you have? Cameo or TikTok video? Oh yeah, I'm not quite so cool. TikTok and I are not friends right now. I haven't really tried to go that route. But that's great. Something that the students are all into. They're all related to making a social media post. Those are all examples of presentational, but they could also kind of turn interpersonal if you comment back and forth with someone. So when we're preparing as an educator for the presentational mode, there's a few things we want to make sure we have. Our clear objectives, your content, what's your communicative purpose? Your performance objective is what proficiency level are your students going to be assessed at? Using a rubric is very important to provide a specific description so the students know what they should be trying to achieve. You want to be upfront and clear with the rubric, maybe even having the students help to create some of the criteria. For your instruction, you want to, of course, include activities that are related to the objectives, related to each other. They're authentic and meaningful and accessible. And of course, throughout the unit, you'll have formative and summative assessments. For your formatives, one place where you might be able to pull from is your interpretive materials. Those are great examples of what does an article look like? What does a review look like? What does a video look like in the target language? And students can see an example and know that that might be something that they can create one as well. And then you'll also want to include small presentations throughout the unit, such as exit tickets or reading aloud. And if you're interested in learning more about those small formative presentations, you can check out Asynchronous Practice Routines on Extempore, which was a webinar given yesterday, July 14th, from Grant. And he shared a lot of great ideas for just quick and easy, low pressure ways for students to engage with the language. Finally, your summative is your culmination of the unit with your final project. For students to start planning for their performance, there are some templates that are included here from Carla, which is the Center for Advanced Research on Language Acquisition from the University of Minnesota, near Grant's home. And they collaborated with ACTFL to create these templates where students can start to jot down ideas and form what they'll be doing when they create their spoken or written presentational performance. And if you were to go on the website there are templates for the 3 modes of communication, for vocabulary, as well as checks for understanding. So let's take a look at our examples on Extempore. I have 4 examples for you that require either a video, audio, or a written response. And these have been shared in the bottom slide of our presentation, as well as on the sketch. Oops. So here's my Extempore class for my students. And this is what they would view. So we have a describe your trip to the restaurant, a reading about Earth Day, how to spend quarantine. That one is written, where they're going to describe what they see in a graphic, as well as describing what they like to do at home, and then describing their last trip to the beach. You can see the little microphone means it's audio, and then these are the video. So let's take a look at this one. Describe your trip to the restaurant. They'll see they have 1 question. Describe what you did the last time you went to the restaurant. Be sure to include where you went, with whom, what you ate and drank, and your thoughts or reactions to the experience. Now, you saw earlier that Grant and Vinny included timers where they may have a set amount of time to prepare the response and then a set amount of time to respond. I didn't put any of those parameters on this question, but that could be something that you can consider if you want the students to have a more limited time frame and not be able to think about it for 10 hours. So then once they have their response ready, they'll be able to record. Hola, la semana pasada yo fui a Red Robin con mi familia. En mi familia, yo tengo mi esposo y nuestras 3 hijas. En Red Robin comimos unas hamburguesas, papas fritas y una ensalada y bebimos limonada. La experiencia fue muy buena y nos divertimos mucho. Gracias. And then in this particular example, if I were like, I don't think I did very well, I could re-record, but for now, I'll just go ahead and submit. And then it'll take me back. I'll just quickly show you one other, the written one, Cómo pasar la cuarentena. Here, students will look at the infographic about activities to do during quarantine, which hopefully we will not experience again. Then write a description of what activities you like to do at home, include which of the activities you would like to do from the picture and why it looks fun to you. You might also include when you do your preferred activities and how often and with whom. So here they can see, okay, ideas to spend quarantine. Okay, hacer ejercicio. Okay, I don't think that one looks good for me. All right, perfect. I'm gonna pick leer libros as the one I like to do. So then they'll be able to type. And then they could continue with responding to other parts of the prompt, or in some cases, they might stop right there and go ahead and submit. So these are just a few ways that students can do a presentational activity through either speaking, creating a video, or writing with Extempore. And all of these modes of the communication are interpretive, interpersonal, and finally presentational, can be used together to create our integrated performance assessment, or IPA. Vinny mentioned he likes to do them. There's something that I'm starting to use more. Grant, are they something that you use frequently in your class?
Slowly but surely. It's a bit of a process, yeah.
Definitely. So this will be something for us to consider for future webinars and doing IPAs with Extempore.
I would say I'm like Grant. I'm slowly but surely. It's a bit of a bumpy ride. And just like I think if I tell my students I want them to use their own language, I can't freak out when they're not producing as much as I thought, but maybe it's a reteaching opportunity. So it is a humbling experience, the IPA process, but slowly but surely, like Grant, I would say that's where I am.
Yes, myself as well. It's little building blocks each at a time to try and get to what truly would be an IPA. So here are our references, and thank you everyone so much.
Yeah, Callie, thank you so much for that final, and Vinny, of course, on doing interpersonal, and Callie on doing presentational. This has been so much fun. Please, if you attended, thank you again for coming. The assessment links are on Sketch. I hate to tell you this, Callie, I took them out of the slides, but so that I could transfer them onto Sketch. Please leave feedback for this session on the Sketch app, because that is where you came from. Send us a tweet or 2 or 10 and use hashtag #ExtemporePD and maybe win yourself a prize. And then come see us next week for more sessions and workshops. Actually, we do have one this afternoon. It is on using Extempore for exams and security at 2:30. So you can see all the fancy features we have for keeping academic integrity when your students are doing things online, because a lot of teachers are very concerned about that, and understandably so. That one will not be hosted by me, believe it or not. It will be hosted by Sam, who is really wonderful at doing these webinars. So you'll get to see him. Next week, we are starting our workshops. One is Task for World Language Teaching. And that one's going to be really exciting. I've been working with a professor from University of Illinois, Chicago, Claudia Fernandez, who is absolutely fantastic. You guys will love her. So please come stay with us and come join us next week for more sessions and workshops. Kelly, if you want to go to the next slide, we can do a Q&A and say thank you.
We do have time for questions if anybody has any.
Absolutely. Yeah, I did not mean to jump over the Q&A part of this. So thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your summer, and hopefully all those ideas are percolating for the coming school year.
Thank you, Adrian. Danke, Sonia.
Selfishly, I kind of have a question for our interpretive expert here today, Grant.
Sure. Yeah.
I know one conversation in our department in years past was the role of questions written in the target language or in English, right? So like, what is your general thought on that? Like, should they be in the target language? Should they be in English? Is it something you start with?
Vinny, I think I know what you're getting at. Can you repeat that real quick?
Absolutely, yeah. So like, I know in our department, we've had some heated debates about, in years past, about like when we're doing interpretive tasks, do we ask the students the questions in either English or in the target language? You know, and the argument, I mean, I understand both sides of it. You don't want to challenge the students on understanding, comprehending the question, but the actual resource. But at the same time, I was always one of those purists of like, well, it's a world language class. We're supposed to be 90%, world language. Right. So like, where do you fall on that? And what are your thoughts on that?
The thing for me, this is a really good question. The thing for me, believe it or not, that I found out very early on, when I did some when I used to always give tests, and I've slowly moved away from that. But when I did that, I might give a text in all Chinese, right? And then I would pose questions in Chinese that students had to answer in Chinese. Well, what did they do? They just copied directly from the text, even if they didn't know what it said, right? So they can just see, oh, okay, well, the answer to the question goes in this spot. I see the characters over here look exactly the same. I'll just write what that says. And then they don't know what it means, but yeah, they're writing down the correct answer, even though they don't know, right? So then you get into a lot of sort of gray area of what you do. So for me, I have no problems at all asking my students with an interpretive exercise to respond in English, right? Because that tells me, do they know, right? Beth says, if you want to know what they're truly understanding, what they read, your questions need to be in L1. Yeah, exactly, right? Because then they can just pull words from the L2 questions or from the target language questions and say, oh, well, I see this, I see cosas here, I see cosas here, I see, you know, tiempo here, I see tiempo in this part. Even if they don't know what it means, they can sort of play the matching the pieces of the puzzle game, right? So I have no problems, particularly with using like mediation exercises where those situations do arise, where you're in the target country, you're with a friend who doesn't speak the language, and they're like, hey, you really need to help me out. That's a perfect way to assess interpretive. Yeah, I think does that answer your question, Vinny?
Well, I don't think I'll ever get a concrete answer, because I think it's over the proficiency levels. We're asking our students to do different things.
Sure.
You know, I do think at AP and level 4 and higher, you know, you probably want the questions in the target language, but
Sure.
like you said, to help the effective filter, to really get them doing actual skills. And then I think one thing that I always think of is like, get them to do more organizers with authentic resources, and then
Yeah.
they're pulling from the resource the language they're going to turn around and use.
think-
But I agree with you mostly.
Yeah.
We have very bright students. World language students are very clever.
Mhm.
They're going to pull and kind of like, you know.
I want to add on though. I don't want to have that be the be all end all. I don't think that means, you know, every time you do interpretive, it has to be in the L1. I don't think that's what I'm saying. I think for novice, low, novice, high learners, it's really valuable to do it like that, right? Once you get up, intermediate, mid, and even the advanced level, have them do something with the text that they are looking at, right? So I might give them a restaurant menu, and then I might have an audio file that is a friend speaking to them in the target language saying, hey, what do you think you're going to order and why, right? And you know, that always putting it in some type of real world task where they have to interpret in the target language, listen to somebody else, and then act upon that and respond. Yeah.
Right. And I love the idea of explain to your friend who speaks English only, or your L1, because that is a real life act. Like that is a real deal thing you do when you are a language speaker. You are constantly mediating for someone who may not be at the proficiency level you're at. So I love that. And what a great like confidence booster for our kids, you know, to realize, okay, something as simple as that is being proficient in the language.
You have no idea how many times I've been asked to interpret Chinese tattoos by other people. But
I remember when we were in college, one of my friends was taking Japanese, and it was in one of the level 200 classes. Part of his final was he had to invite a friend, and he had asked me to come and have a conversation in which he was the translator. So the teacher would ask him a question, he would ask me in English, I would say something, and then he would have to translate back. Now, of course, the teacher did understand me, so she would know if his translation were accurate or not. So it's kind of a cool exercise too.
yeah, I mean, that's literally being an interpreter, which is, you know, the essence of interpretive practice.
Thank you so much. I always appreciate those like brain ticklers, because like this is something I feel like in every department I've been a part of, we've had a conversation about that, you know, and I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer, but like you guys said, depending on the proficiency level, it's kind of a volume type thing. We can turn up or down depending on where the kid is with their language journey.
I think just to sort of wrap up this conversation, I think you're going to get pushback from both sides, right? There are going to be people who say, oh, I never use L1 to assess my students.
Right.
Go ahead. Sure. Don't do that. But I use it and it works perfectly fine.
Right.
And it tells me what my students know. And it, to an extent, it also takes the pressure off the students to, you know, constantly have to produce the target language when we're just saying, do you know what this means?
Right. Do what works best for you and your students, right? Like it's been a year and a half of that.
Yeah.
Yep. And then, so Miriam, your question is related to the schedule. When is the teaching a second language webinar?
I think she means the tasks.
Oh, the tasks.
Like, I don't think we're going to do a webinar on teaching a second language. I think, yeah.
For the tasks one, is that next week?
So it's next week, Monday and Tuesday. Yeah. And I will, I believe Miriam is on the Sketch platform. I think I've seen her name. I can send her a message and let her know. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It is Monday. The first session is Monday, I think at 12:15, 12:30.
3 p.m. Central, so 4 p.m. Eastern time.
3 p.m. Excuse me.
And then your Tuesday session is 12:15 Central time,
Yeah.
1:15.
Got it. Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. And just as a reminder, this webinar, this recording, if you're still here, will be on YouTube in a matter of maybe an hour and a half or so. So and you'll be able to view it again in all of its glory.
And all of the slides and the resources we shared, those are on Sketch.
They're all on Sketch. That's correct.
I'm looking forward to this Spanish teacher meetup next week. That's going to be a fun one.
We're looking forward to having you, Vinny. Are there any other questions that we can answer?
We need to do a little nice wrap here.
Okay, our audience is dwindling. I will stop the recording